Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Jodie Guest. I'm an infectious disease epidemiologist and professor and vice chair of the Department of Epidemiology at Rollins School of Public Health here at Emory University. I lead Emory's COVID-19 outbreak response team working in hard-hit communities around Georgia, and I'm pleased to be the host for Emory's COVID-19 Facebook Live events, where we cover topics about the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, I am pleased to be joined by Dr. Colleen Kelley. Dr. Kelley is an associate professor of medicine in the Division of Infectious Diseases at Emory University School of Medicine. Dr. Kelley is a site investigator for the HIV Vaccine Trials Network at the Hope Clinic and collaborates closely with my research group here at Rollins School of Public Health on several HIV prevention studies. She is also the principal investigator for the Moderna study at the Ponce de Leon Center, and is here today to speak to us about the exciting news released yesterday by Moderna about the phase 3 trials interim analysis. This study, which is known as the COVID study, enrolled more than 30,000 participants aged 18 and older in the United States and is being conducted in collaboration with NIH and the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, part of the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. This first interim analysis was released yesterday and is based on 95 cases. 90 of these occurred in the placebo group and 5 cases were observed in the active vaccine trial group. This resulted in vaccine efficacy of 94.5%, and it was making the headlines everywhere yesterday. So Dr. Kelley, first, let's start with how did Emory get involved in this trial and what has your role been?
Well, Emory has always been a leader in vaccine research and infectious diseases research. So we've been engaged in infectious diseases clinical trials for many years. We have been part of national networks that conducted multi-center clinical trials as HIV, other infectious diseases, influenza, TB, Zika, Ebola, et cetera. And so this is just part of what we do in responding to infectious diseases is conduct clinical trials for new products, vaccines, and treatments. And so that's how we got involved from really day one. So my colleague here at the Hope Clinic, Dr. Nadine Rufael, and Dr. Evan Anderson at Emory Children's Center, actually were engaged early on in the phase 1 clinical trials, which were the first in humans of this Moderna mRNA product. I became involved with the efficacy trials, which was phase 3 to determine whether it could actually prevent symptomatic COVID disease.
Wonderful. Well, this is certainly very exciting for all of us. Can we talk about what the primary endpoint was for this analysis and start there?
Yeah, so the primary endpoint was symptomatic, documented by PCR test, COVID disease. So we vaccinated participants with 2 vaccines at day 1 and day 28. And then 2 weeks after the second vaccine, we began to count these endpoints. So we vaccinated folks and they either got the active mRNA product or they got placebo. It was a 50-50 split. And then we followed folks and we checked in with them very frequently to see if they had developed any symptoms that could be consistent with COVID. If they did develop any symptoms that could be consistent with COVID, we brought them back into the research site and tested them and then followed them very closely for the resolution of their symptoms. So it's those people that got the vaccine that we brought in for testing that made up those 95 cases of symptomatic COVID disease. That was the primary endpoint.
Great, thank you. And then this trial, of course, has many other secondary endpoints. Let's talk for a moment about what some of those key secondary endpoints are, because they're obviously very important as we think about how this vaccine will be effective.
Yeah, so we don't know a lot about the outcomes of the secondary endpoints, but I can tell you a little bit about what a few of them are. For instance, does it prevent acquisition of SARS-CoV-2 at all, or is it just preventing symptomatic disease? So does it prevent asymptomatic disease? That's one of the outcomes we're waiting to hear about. We likely won't hear about until this study is completed. The other outcomes are, does it prevent severe disease? So we know that it prevents mild to moderate disease. Does it prevent people from being hospitalized or even mortality? We do know that in the preliminary data that 11 cases of severe disease did occur in the placebo arm and none occurred in the vaccine arm. So again, we have to wait for continued follow-up and continued accrual of cases to see if that continues to bear out, but it's looking very good. So other immune responses are also secondary outcomes of the study, and those are still data are being accumulated and being studied. So there's lots to hear about as the study continues, as the data are published in peer-reviewed format. Right now, we just have a press release from the company. I feel very confident in the efficacy results. I don't think those will change, but these secondary outcomes will be important for us to look at. Side effects are another important thing that we need to hear more about. Some people are definitely having mild to moderate side effects from vaccination, and so that's something else that we're very interested in being able to describe more carefully.
And so let's spend a moment on those side effects. People are always very interested in that as well. What kind of side effects we're seeing most commonly, again, given that this is only an interim analysis so far?
So sore arm, muscle aches, a minority of folks have a kind of a febrile illness after the vaccination, especially the second vaccination. So they develop fever, muscle aches, headache, some nausea and vomiting as well. And in rare participants that can happen usually 24 to 36 hours after vaccination, and more likely to occur after the second vaccine compared to the first.
Okay, is that all surprising? It's more common after the second than the first?
It was not surprising simply because that's exactly what was seen in the phase 1 studies, and that's what's been seen across the phase 1 studies. So not just with this product, but with other products that are in development. For whatever reason, this antigen, the spike protein, which is what all of the current vaccine platforms are designed around, appears to behave in this way. The immune system sees it in this way.
Okay, but let's be clear, you do need that second dose of this vaccine, correct?
As far as we know, you do need the second dose of the vaccine, although that is absolutely something that's going to be looked at, whether how necessary the second dose of the vaccine might be. The phase 1 data would suggest that yes, in order to mount a significant antibody response, that the second dose is required. There is one other trial that's currently in phase 3 that is a single dose. That's the Janssen product. That's a single dose vaccine, and so we're anxiously awaiting those results as well, because obviously that would be much easier to implement than a 2-dose vaccine schedule.
Right, absolutely. But 28 days apart is not terrible.
Not too bad.
Yes, yes. So let's talk about what an interim analysis actually means. So when the Data Safety Monitoring Board, gets together, who are they, what are they doing, and how do they get this first look at these data?
Interim analyses are planned as part of almost all clinical trials. Initially to look for harm, to make sure that whatever we're giving to people, the experimental product we're giving to people, is not causing harm. They can also look at interim analyses as well to see if the product is effective. And that's what happened here, was looking first to make sure that the product wasn't harming people, but also if it was effective. So this trial was designed around about 150 outcomes or so with the final number. And the interim analyses were planned at around 50 and then around 100. The cases accrued so quickly because of the current surge in coronavirus cases recently in the US, that they were able to, between the time they stopped for interim analysis at that 50 mark, they were able to accrue another 40 cases. So 90 cases were analyzed in this first interim analysis. So the data goes to the Data Safety and Monitoring Board, and that's generally made up of clinical trials experts in the field of infectious diseases, COVID experts who are not engaged in the trial, who are not involved in the trial. And what happens is the data are unblinded, which means they take all of the data and they look at who got vaccine versus who got placebo, and they compare those rates of side effects, and then they compare the rates of symptomatic COVID disease, which was the primary outcome. And so no one else gets to see who got vaccine or who got placebo except for the DSMB at this point in time. And so we trust that those experts will make a recommendation based on the data that they are privy to see that we aren't privy to see. In this case, yes, the DSMB is made up of our colleagues, experts in infectious diseases that are well respected, but who are not participating in the trial, in the conduct of the trial. And so I think, yes, we have a lot of trust that they have made an accurate decision.
That's wonderful. And to be clear, this was a press release. You've mentioned that already, but it was a press release that was filled with more data than we've seen in other sorts of vaccine trial press releases. So we have a little bit more to look at. But the general next step will be for it to go to a peer-reviewed journal, and then we would all have more information to examine.
That's right, and we can't wait for that.
Right, absolutely. So as a really important part of all of the vaccine trials for COVID-19 has been the diversity of inclusion in the trial participants. So can you talk a little bit about what you have done to help with diversity and how successful this has been for this particular vaccine?
Yeah, so I, as you say in the beginning, come from an HIV background. So, diversity and marginalized populations is kind of what we've, experienced and engaged with, forever in the HIV field. And so it was a little bit surprising to me how new making sure that the populations that are most affected by the disease needed to have the opportunity to join the clinical trials if they should choose. But that's what happened is this appeared to be somewhat of a new concept, I think, that, we needed to make sure that those people that were most likely to benefit from the vaccine, so those populations that are most hardest hit by increased rates of disease, but also morbidity and mortality, had the opportunity to join the trial if they would like to. And that's important for many reasons. We need to trust that the results that we see are generalizable to all populations. And so in this case, we were particularly concerned with ensuring that Black and Latinx and Native American populations had the opportunity to join the trial if they wanted to, such that when we see the results, we can trust that participation of diverse communities contributed to these data, and that we know that this vaccine will have similar efficacy across underrepresented minority groups, across age distributions, across sex and gender distributions as well. So, that is critical to the success of vaccine trials. Here at the Emory sites, we actually did quite well in enrolling diverse populations. I think we benefited for a few reasons. A, we live in Atlanta, where populations are so diverse in this wonderful city. And also, like I said, the background in HIV research, and that we were already engaging with diverse communities and had that kind of trust of some communities that we weren't trying to harm them with this vaccine trial.
That's great. Yes, diversity of our communities in Atlanta is one of the most beautiful parts about living here, for sure. Mm-hmm. A lot of conversation happened in the previous couple of weeks with the Pfizer vaccine coming out and the need for cold storage that it has. Can we talk a little bit about what sort of storage needs this particular vaccine has and if it's different?
Yeah, so both vaccines require cold storage for part of their kind of lifespan. The difference is how long between the time it needs the cold storage and the time you can inject it into a human being differs. So the ultra cold storage that the Pfizer vaccine requires up until honestly shortly before you have to deliver the vaccine is really only found in specialized laboratories and is not something that's typically found in a pharmacy or a doctor's office, or certainly not a health department. Where we're hoping to deploy these vaccines widely. The Moderna vaccine is stable in a regular freezer, not an ultra cold freezer, for many months. And then it's stable for up to 30 days in a regular refrigerator and at room temperature for, I believe it's up to 12 hours. And so that is a huge difference between these vaccines and the ability to deploy them widely throughout our country, throughout resource limited settings in other countries as well. And so it is an important difference, despite the fact that these vaccines are nearly identical in the messenger RNA product that they are delivering. Their other formulations somehow make it different, their storage requirements different. And we don't really understand this because some of that is proprietary, but we think that the Moderna vaccine is enveloped in a lipid nanoparticle, could have something to do with it, but that's really just a guess at this point.
Okay, but a very important difference. And as you said, going to be very different in the way it needs to be delivered and where it can get to across the United States and other parts of the world.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about what's next. So we've got a vaccine. It looks really great. It's obviously very exciting. Now, what do people do in order to get approval from the FDA? What's the next step?
Well, both companies, Pfizer and Moderna, have said they're going to submit for emergency use authorization in the next few weeks. Both companies are actually waiting a few more weeks to accrue additional safety data. Both companies want to see at least half of their participants reach the 2-month mark after the second vaccine, so that we have sufficient safety data so that they have sufficient safety data to submit to the FDA. So what they're planning to submit for is the infamous EUA, or Emergency Use Authorization, which is something that FDA will grant in the times of public health emergencies. I think we can all agree COVID qualifies as a public health emergency.
Indeed.
If there is not an alternative, treatment or prevention modality available, the FDA will grant these emergency use authorizations, which is not full approval. It does not mean that the drug has been fully vetted or the vaccine has been fully vetted per normal protocols. It simply means that it looks like the benefits likely outweigh the risks. And there's nothing else available to offer. And so those are the requirements, as I understand them, to get an EUA. After the EUA, the trials will go on, and how those trials will continue is a topic under active discussion right now, and it's actually not yet been decided. We'd like to see our placebo recipients have access to the active product, but when and how that will happen is not yet clear. A lot depends on what the EUA says, how that will happen. After that, the trials will continue. We will hopefully get peer-reviewed data, and then those data will go to FDA for final approval of the product.
Great. Thank you. Can you tell us, or what your best guess is on if the vaccine works the same in all people, or if it might be less effective of those who might have had prior risk or prior infections with COVID-19?
Well, prior infections, I think that remains to be seen how that will bear out. But the data that we've seen so far does appear that the vaccine is effective across all subgroups that were pre-specified in the protocol. So across age groups, across genders, and across underrepresented minority groups as well. And so that's great news. But again, we have to wait for those data to be examined and vetted before we can put much stock in them. For folks who've had prior COVID vaccination or COVID and disease, such as myself, the jury is still out as to what will happen. I think it depends whether people had developed antibodies or not, in whether they will go on to get the vaccine or not. So that's a great question. And I think it's something that we are considering as next steps in understanding how these vaccines will be used.
So for a moment, let's talk about durability of the response. So there is some idea that durability of an immune response, if you have had COVID-19 infection, is maybe up to 3 months and not much beyond that. And so why is that different from the vaccine?
Well, we know, I think it looks up to 3 months. We don't know much about beyond that. I think it's probably longer than 3 months for some people, and for most people, actually, especially those that develop symptomatic disease. And I think the vaccine will likely show something similar, but this is such a new entity to all of us. We're still understanding immunity and definitely understanding long-lived immunity of the vaccine and of COVID disease. So only time will tell whether this vaccine response is durable. I will say the early data, which is at this point only a few months long, looks pretty good. And we think that some longevity, whether it's on the months to years timeframe, is still to be determined. But I think some longevity is expected from both the vaccine and natural infection.
Okay, wonderful. And let's go back again to side effects. Let's review again what some of those side effects were that we saw from this interim analysis, and also how common they were.
So the most common thing I would say is sore arm and maybe some redness, similar to the tetanus shot if you've ever gotten that. And then that probably occurs in a minority of folks, but a significant minority, maybe 10 to 30% of folks. And then the other side effects are more unusual, but still, if we're talking about vaccinating everyone on the globe, we'll see them pretty frequently. Things like fever, headache, nausea, vomiting, just feeling bad, feeling ill for the first 24 to 36 hours after the vaccine. We see, as we spoke about, more side effects after the second vaccine compared to the first. So that's good. So people aren't scared away after the first dose.
Right.
But really what that is it's the immune system. It's the immune system responding to the vaccine. And to some degree, it's kind of a good thing because it tells you that your immune system is working and is making an immune response and antibody response to the vaccine. So while the side effects may be uncomfortable, at the end of the day, we think that it's probably a good thing.
Okay. And no one was hospitalized for any side effects from this phase 3 trial?
From the phase 3, that is to be determined.
Okay. All right.
So
Very
that's
good.
so far what we know. It doesn't appear that way.
And now that we have two vaccines in a phase 3 trial that are going for EUAs soon, to be clear, if I were to start with the Moderna vaccine, I need to have the Moderna booster at day 28, not move to the Pfizer, correct?
That's what I would do. Yes.
Okay. All right.
We have no information about how these vaccines kind of would cross-react with one another. And that's also an interesting question, but it's not something we have no idea about.
Okay. And how about the other vaccine trials that are continuing? I know there are 3 others that are a little bit behind in time from both Moderna and Pfizer. Do you have any information on how those are progressing?
I don't know the overall enrollment numbers. There is the Janssen vaccine that's actually enrolling here at Emory Children's Center with Evan Anderson. And then there is the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is not enrolling at any of our Emory sites. It's actually enrolling globally here in the US and abroad. I do not know off the top of my head those enrollment numbers and what their projections are. Of course, they're going as quickly as they possibly can because they would like to close soon as well, given the great news we've gotten from Pfizer and Moderna. So we will have to see. There are 2 other products that are following close behind. The Novavax product is hoping to open in the next few weeks. That's a traditional protein vaccine and with adjuvant. So I think people are very excited about that because it's not a new thing. It's not mRNA was a new vaccine modality. So this Novavax product, a traditional protein vaccine with adjuvant that also shows very high antibody levels, people are quite excited about. And then there's a Sanofi product as well that's coming later on in the winter. But both of those are set to enter phase 3 trials very soon as well. So we'll have lots of options, and I think everyone believes that we will need lots of options to vaccinate the entire globe. And so, time will tell who kind of wins the race and who ends up getting the biggest market share for all of these among all of these products.
But as you pointed out, we're going to need all of these. So when we get great data like this, the others don't stop. They continue forward.
No, but I will say that we're going to have to see if the design of those trials will need to change at some point. Currently they are all designed as placebo-controlled trials, and obviously the ones that are open will stay as placebo-controlled trials because we don't yet have an EUA or yet have FDA approval for these other products. But trials that could open next year, Merck has a product that they are considering. There's other products out there. If companies or individuals are looking to put a product into trials next year, they'll likely not be able to do a placebo-controlled trial. And that has huge implications for trial design, cost, size, endpoints, et cetera. So
absolutely. And for everyone watching, we wouldn't then have a placebo-controlled trial because it would at that point in time be unethical to move forward because there would be a standard of care. If these go
right. So next year, any new vaccine would likely have to be compared to an effective vaccine because we anticipate that we will have those by the end of the year approved.
Okay, so let's move to timing. You've now given us a glimpse. You think that there will be some approvals by the end of this year. Is that correct?
That's what's anticipated, barring any issues with the EUAs. Like I said, Pfizer and Moderna are anticipating submission in the next couple of weeks. And then we'll see. They're both prepared to ship many millions of doses by the end of this calendar year, and then up to, I think it's something they've said, 1 billion in 2021. And so we'll see. Time will tell. But it's looking very good for potential EUA approval by the end of 2020, if not very, very early in 2021.
Okay, and then next steps. So for those of us who are not enrolled in vaccine trials yet, what is the next step, and when we be eligible to start getting these vaccines?
Well, that all depends on what the EUA states and who's approved to receive the EUA vaccine. Will it be approved for only those folks that are high risk of severe outcomes? So people who are over the age of 65, people who have underlying comorbidities, or will it be approved for general use? All of these will be determined by the FDA. I'd also like to note that none of these trials have included children. The Pfizer vaccine has gone down to the age of 12 in its clinical trial in a small set of people, but for children and pregnant women, those trials have not even begun yet. And so we'll be looking for those hopefully early next year as well. So at this point, we're just looking at vaccination for adults. HHS, in collaboration with many experts in the field, has kind of laid out a roadmap for how the vaccine kind of phases of implementation, who should get it first. For example, healthcare workers and people in nursing homes or other congregate living settings might get access to the vaccine first, followed by those over age 65 with comorbidities. School teachers and other staff members, et cetera, are kind of in these waves that HHS has set up. They're also working closely with state health departments and local health departments to think about how the vaccine would be deployed once it's available. So all of that's in development, but I think it will be some months, certainly, before the general public sees vaccine available in your doctor's office, in your pharmacy, at your local health department. I think Dr. Tony Fauci has said maybe by spring, but probably more likely summer of next year is what Dr. Fauci has been suggesting.
Okay, and so again, we all need to wait. And we need to wait for FDA approval. This is a huge leap forward, but it is still not available to the general population and will, as you said, Dr. Kelley, be coming out in phases for high-risk groups. How about a choice of vaccine? Let's just imagine that both the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine get FDA approval pretty close together. And now it's a time when I am eligible to get the vaccine. Am I gonna have a choice between these two?
I have no idea. We'll see at this point in time between these two vaccines and what we've known so far. There's no reason that I'm aware of to choose one or the other if they're both sitting in front of you. Mm-hmm. But back to your point, though, about waiting, let's not forget that there are still things that we can do to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and protect ourselves and our families. And those things obviously include wearing a mask, physical distancing, washing hands, avoiding crowds, and then isolating or quarantining if you either have come into contact with someone who's ill or if you yourself have been diagnosed with COVID-19. All of those things will make a difference. And we just have to hold on a few more months in practicing those activities.
Thank you. I could not have said that better when we need to hear that message all the time. So incredible news. We're so grateful for all the work that you've done, Dr. Kelley, and your entire team with this vaccine. It's incredibly exciting. It's a really proud moment for Emory to be part of this as well. And we ask everyone who's watching, please remember that you have a lot to do with how this COVID-19 is surging across the United States right now. There's a lot that you can do. And that includes, as Dr. Kelley said, wearing your mask, social distancing, making sure you stay safe and away from those who have COVID-19, and consistently washing your hands. So everyone stay safe. Thank you, Dr. Kelley, so much for joining me today. And we will be live again tomorrow with Dr. Jay Barkey to discuss the climbing cases of COVID-19 across the United States. So I look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. And again, thank you, Dr. Kelley.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.